This is the last section for Unit 1, so Unit 1, Part 3. I'm going to be talking through all the lecture notes just like as if I was in class, but since I don't know if you're done taking the notes, I'm just going to keep going, and as you need to, pause the recording so that you can get everything that you need down. So Unit 1, Part 3 is Chemistry of Life. This is the biggest section that we've gone over so far, so here we go. Chemistry helps us understand biology because organisms, including yourself, are chemical machines. You don't have to write this down, but think about it. There are different things in our body that are constantly going on, and a lot of that is chemistry. So in order for us to understand biology and living organisms, we need to understand some chemistry. So that's what this section is about. Atoms. Atom is the smallest unit of an element that maintains the properties of that element. It's the smallest unit of matter that cannot be broken down by any chemical means. An atom will consist of an electron, a proton, and a neutron, or of neutrons. Electrons have negative charges, protons have positive charges, and neutrons have no charge. A nucleus of an atom is where the protons and neutrons are located. Electrons will have an electronic cloud around the nucleus. And for every one electron, there's a proton. So, my question to you is, what is the overall charge of a nucleus? If a nucleus contains protons and neutrons, what's the overall charge of the nucleus? Protons are positive, neutrons have no charge, therefore the nucleus is positive because of the protons. So electrons, let me ask you this. Electrons, or the electron cloud, what's its overall charge? And since electrons are negative, the electron cloud is then negative as well. Atoms, what's the overall charge of an atom? If the nucleus is positive and the electron cloud is negative, for every electron, you have a proton, an overall charge of an atom is no charge. So here's a picture of an atom. Here in the center, you have the nucleus where you have protons and neutrons, and then this blue guy around is the electron cloud where the electrons are contained. An element is a substance that cannot be separated or broken down into simpler substances by chemical means. So, all atoms of an element have the same atomic number, and pure substances is only made up of one kind of atom. So oxygen that we breathe, it's not just one oxygen molecule or one oxygen floating around. It's actually two oxygen. We breathe in O2. So this is an element that is these pure substances only made up of one kind of atom. So that would be an example of pure oxygen. There are three types of chemical bonds: covalent bond, hydrogen bonds, and ionic bonds that we're going to be talking about. Bonds form compounds, and compounds is a substance made up of atoms of two or more different elements joined together. So this is different now. It's not like oxygen and oxygen. It is two different things. So like water. Water is made up of two hydrogens and one oxygen, and that is then a compound because it has two different elements in it, hydrogens and oxygens. Covalent bonds are when two or more atoms share electrons to form a molecule. Okay, here's the thing. Covalent bonds share electrons. Covalent bonds share electrons. Covalent bonds share electrons. And if I was in class right now, I would say covalent bonds, and I'd want you to say share electrons. That's what you have to remember out of this, is covalent bonds share electrons. Molecule is the smallest unit of a substance that keeps all of the physical and chemical properties of that substance. It can consist of one atom or two or more atoms bonded together. So you can have a big old pool of water that you go swimming in, but you can break that down into one single molecule of water, and all the properties are still going to be the same as one big pool of water. So covalent bonds, they share electrons. So here's a water molecule down here at the bottom. We've got two hydrogens and their electron clouds and one oxygen. When they share electrons, their electron clouds literally overlap, so they literally can share electrons. Hydrogen bonds. Hydrogen bonds. This is when a hydrogen is attached to another molecule, compound, or element. Water molecules are polar. When you think of polar, I bet most of you think of the North Pole and the South Pole. They're opposites, okay? Same thing applies here. Polar molecules are negative in one area and positive in another. So they're opposite charges is what we're talking about here. The positive area is going to be attracted to a negative area, and the negative area to a positive area. Kind of makes sense. Opposites attract. This is it. Polar molecules attract to other polar molecules. So here you go. You have different water molecules. Okay, now water molecules attracted to each other are hydrogen bonds. So this hydrogen is partially positive, and it's attracted to this partially negative oxygen side, and so on and so forth. So that's why these water molecules want to stay together. But in all reality, water is not bonded like overlapped. It's just a strong, strong attraction to each other. So the polarity of water, here's another picture. These are your covalent bonds right here to make up the water molecule, but then water molecules attracted to other water molecules, you've got this positive side over here and this negative side over here. Okay, so this brings me to this video.
Wow. So no practice run? Sounds
Just
good.
on.
Oh
Nope.
dear God, this is gonna be
Oh, look at him getting all ready.
Jesus Christi. What? From
Oh yeah, we gotta practice
the one-step approach?
yep. Yeah.
Oh!
Amazing.
So, why do belly flops hurt? Why do belly flops hurt? Belly flops hurt because of hydrogen bonds. As I said, water molecules are not attracted to each other as they can never be broken apart. It's just an extreme, strong attraction by hydrogen bonds. So those hydrogen bonds have to be broken for you to get in some water. When you do a belly flop, you have all that surface area and you go flying through the air. And when you smack and you hit the water, those hydrogen bonds don't want to let you in. They want to stay together. So that's why when you've seen people do a belly flop, they kind of hit the water and then they finally settle in. It's because when they hit, those hydrogen bonds are not breaking. And then the hydrogen bonds register that you're there and they say, meh, okay, we'll break. And then they slowly go down into the water. So belly flops hurt because of hydrogen bonds. Why does diving not hurt then? With diving, you're hitting the water with the smallest bit of surface area right here. So your hands act as a knife and it slices through those hydrogen bonds so people can slice into the water and dive in. So you've got belly flops where you have this large surface area and you're just smacking the hydrogen bonds, and the hydrogen bonds do not want to break apart. They will eventually, and that's why you settle down in, but it takes a little bit. But when you dive, you're slicing it with your hands and you're slicing those hydrogen bonds in half, and therefore you can go into the water pain-free. Another reason why you or bugs can stay on top of the water is these hydrogen bonds. These bugs have very, very, very little surface area right here. So their weight is distributed to the point that their surface area is not enough to break the hydrogen bonds. And since it cannot break hydrogen bonds, they can swim on top of the water or walk on top of the water. Okay, the third type of bonding is ionic bonding. Ionic bonding is an atom or molecule that has gained or lost one or more electrons and has a positive or negative charge. So they have unequal numbers of protons and electrons. So if you gain electrons, what kind of charge is the ion now going to have? If you gain negative electrons, what kind of charge will the ion have? It will have a negative charge because you gained negative things. If you lost electrons or lost negative things, then what would the charge be? And that charge would be positive. So here is ionic bonding. Sodium is a 1 plus ion and chloride is a 1 minus ion. So they are going to come really close together and be attracted to each other because this one's positive, that one's negative, so they'll come very close to each other. Here's another form of, or just another picture of ionic and covalent bonding. Ionic bonding is when they're going to be really, really close together. This one's going to have a positive charge and a negative charge, and they form this little crystalline structure here. So NaCl is the formal name for table salt. But when you have covalent bonding, which shares electrons, covalent bonds share electrons, there's this electron that's literally being shared around the outside here, okay? So ionic bonds, we're going to have a positive and a negative, and they're going to be really close together. Covalent bonds, they're going to share those electrons. And then when we have a polar molecule like water, the electrons are going to be closer to one side than the other. So you end up with a positive and a negative, and therefore then it can attract two other positive and negative things, like the hydrogen bonding. Water in solutions. So, about 70% of your body is made up of water. The purpose of water is storage of heat. Water heats more slowly than other liquids. It retains heat longer, and it's also a way for us to release heat. What am I talking about? A way to release heat. Sweat. You release heat through sweat. So that's an important thing. We've got to be able to get rid of heat in our body so we don't overheat. Remember homeostasis and keeping our body temperatures about the same? This is where that comes in. Cohesion and adhesion. Cohesion is a force that holds molecules of a single material together. So hydrogen bonding with other water molecules, you're trying to hold just water molecules together. So it's cohesion. Adhesion is a force between two bodies of different substances. So when a water is drawn up a stem of a plant, due to the strong attraction of the plant cells, it's attracted to plant cells. It's two different things, so adhesion. A solution is a homogeneous mixture of two or more substances uniformly dispersed throughout a single phase. Homogeneous, that's a big word. Homo means the same. So this looks the same throughout. So that's another word for uniform, okay? It looks the same throughout, and that's a solution. Something dissolved in another substance. Water happens to actually be the universal solvent, and here's the reason why. The polarity of water allows for many different things to be dissolved in it. So, it can dissolve a lot of different things, and therefore it is the universal solvent. Also, ionic and polar compounds dissolve best in water. So polarity, we kind of talked about it before, but here is another description of it in a little bit more detail. So polarity, non-polar molecules do not dissolve well in water because we already looked at the water molecule and it's polar. So polar things like to dissolve in polar things, and non-polar things like to dissolve in non-polar things. So what you see over here is a picture of oil and water, the classic mixture. Water is polar, so oil, because it doesn't want to mix with it, we can assume it is non-polar. The function of the cell membrane depends on the polarity of molecules. We'll get into that more, but that's extremely important to remember, is that polarity is how the cell membrane functions. Acids and bases. Any compound that increases the number of hydrogen ions when dissolved in water. So the more hydrogen ions being released equals an acid. And a base is any compound that increases the number of hydroxide ions when dissolved in water. And hydroxide is an OH. So the more OHs that happen, the more likely it is a base. And so here we go. We add acid into water. By definition, it says that more hydrogen ions will be produced. So therefore, that means for sure that's an acid. A base is added to water, you get more of hydroxides or OHs, and therefore that's a base. Here's common ones that people know about. Hydrochloric acid. Hydrochloric acid is HCl. HCl, when you add HCl in water, it's going to break up into Cl and H. So there's more of those H plus ions so that you can prove that it's an acid. Sodium hydroxide, you have an Na and an OH. When it breaks up, you have Na and OH over here. So more hydroxide ions equals a base. Acids and bases. Bonds of water molecules might break to form hydrogen ions and hydroxide ions. So when I have a water molecule right here, it can break down into a hydrogen ion and hydroxide ion. So can water act as an acid, base, or both acid and a base? What do you think? Well, if it has H+, it's an acid. If it has OH, it's a base. So what can water be? Water can actually act as both depending on the situation. So a pH scale, if you look at a pH scale, it goes from 0 to 14. 0 being the most extreme acidic situations. Okay? So right here, this is your acid side. If I can write, ooh, look at that C. There's your acid. Down here, anything above 7, 7's the magic number right in the middle. Anything above 7 is a base. Okay, so you have things in here like your saliva is at a 7, urine is a little bit above 7 or below 7. So since it's below 7, it's an acid. Okay, so you can look on here and see some things that you might wonder where they lie. Okay, so which image A or B, represents nonpolar molecules within water molecules? So a couple things you need to think about right now. Water molecules are polar, and polar things like to mix with polar things. Nonpolar things like to mix with nonpolar things. So if you're mixing nonpolar with polar, which happens to be water, they're actually not going to mix at all. So that's going to be image B. Chemistry of cells. So we've got carbon compounds. Most matter in our body are made up of carbon compounds covalently bonded. So if it is made up of carbon, it is considered an organic compound. Anything made up of carbon is organic. Anything made up with carbon is organic. That's extremely important to remember. There are 4 main types of organic molecules. You can call these macromolecules even. They are carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. Carbohydrates are any organic compound that is made up of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen and provides nutrients to the cells of living things. They are a key source of energy found in most foods. When you think of carbohydrates, everyone's got something because people are like, oh, you don't need to have so many carbs in your diet. You know, people instantly go there. So we have a monosaccharide, and that's a simple sugar made up of the basic unit of a carbohydrate. So carbohydrate is made up of a bunch of monosaccharides. Mono means one, saccharide means sugar. So one sugar, a bunch of those together make up a full carbohydrate. So you have this one glucose molecule, which is a type of sugar. It's a monosaccharide. This is one sugar molecule. But over here we have 2 sugar molecules, and those 2 sugar molecules make a disaccharide. Di meaning 2. Poly meaning many, so many sugars. You have this long chain. You've got 1, 2, 3, 4 chains of sugar molecules put together. So you have a polysaccharide, and this actually makes up a starch. So things like potatoes. The next macromolecule is lipids. Lipid is a type of biochemical that does not dissolve in water. So this is your fats, your steroids, your phospholipids, which is in your cell membrane, and waxes. Lipids store energy and make up the cell membrane. Oh, look, there we go. And they are nonpolar. Extremely important. Lipids are nonpolar and they make up that cell membrane. Lipids such as saturated fatty acids, all of the carbon atoms in the chain are bonded to two hydrogen atoms. These are generally solid at room temperature. Unsaturated fatty acids, carbons are double bonded together, so they're generally liquid at room temperature, such like olive oil. Hydrogenated oil, you'll hear that term on commercials. It's naturally unsaturated fats that have been artificially saturated, such as margarine or vegetable shortening. And here's what I mean by saturated and unsaturated. Saturated means it is full, as full as it can be, super saturated. You know, when you are just saturated, maybe it is rained and you got completely saturated. It means you're wet from head to toe, that you are completely wet. Well, here we go. In a saturated fatty acid, every single one of these carbons is surrounded by hydrogens all over the place. So it makes it solid at room temperature because there's nowhere place for it to move or bend. Unsaturated, you're missing some hydrogens. Okay? Since you're missing these hydrogens, that can flow, and therefore it is liquid at room temperature. Protein is the next macromolecule. It's an organic compound that is made up of one or more chains of amino acids. So amino acids are the building blocks of proteins. Extremely important to know. There are 20 different amino acids, and those amino acids are the building blocks of proteins. So here's generally what an amino acid looks like. When I was in college, I had to memorize every single structure, be able to draw it, and name it. It gets interesting, 20 different amino acids, but that's what proteins are made up of. Proteins link together to form these proteins, and then these protein chains like this glob together to make a huge globular protein. Another macromolecule are the nucleic acids. Nucleic acids are organic compounds which are either RNA or DNA. And those molecules are made up of two chains of nucleotide and carry genetic information. A nucleotide consists of a sugar, phosphate, and nitrogenous base. Extremely important to remember that a nucleotide consists of a sugar, a phosphate, and a nitrogenous base. And many nucleotides put together make up a nucleic acid. So here's your nucleic acid. Here, let me get my pen out. Here is one nucleotide. It's made up of a sugar, a phosphate, and a nitrogenous base. And that's a nucleotide. Many nucleotides together make up a nucleic acid. The two nucleic acids are DNA and RNA. DNA is a double-stranded molecule. It actually, DNA stands for deoxyribonucleic acid. So there's your DNA. Deoxyribonucleic acid is the material that contains genetic information. It is a double-stranded molecule. RNA stands for ribonucleic acid. So there's your RNA. And it's a natural polymer that is present in all living cells and plays a role in protein synthesis. This one is single-stranded. So there is your nucleotide again, made up of a sugar, phosphate, nitrogenous base. Many nucleotides together make up a nucleic acid. Nucleic acids are either DNA or RNA. ATP. ATP is adenosine triphosphate. Tri means 3. Right here, tri means 3. So it's one adenosine with 3 phosphates is this organic molecule. It's a main source of energy for all cell processes. It's combined of a nitrogenous base, adenosine specifically, a sugar, and 3 phosphate groups. So here is what ATP looks like. You've got your adenine, your sugar, and your 3 phosphates for triphosphate. Okay, and that concludes the notes for Unit 1, Part 3.